Desperation. The Hyperion, a UNS colony ship, hurtled through the void of space. Captain Ilara Vance gripped the armrests of her command chair as another blast rocked the vessel. On the view screen, a swarm of angular alien crafts filled the starfield, energy lances stabbing out to batter the Hyperion's faltering shields. Shields down to 15%. Lieutenant Kai Tanaka called out from the tactical station, his face pale. "Weapons are losing power. We can't take much more of this, Captain." Ilara clenched her jaw. The Vraxi had caught them by surprise, warping in from some unseen corner of the sector. The alien race was known for their aggression and their advanced weaponry. The Hyperion, a mere colony ship, had been hopelessly outmatched from the start. "Divert all power to shields and thrusters," Ilara ordered. "We need to buy time for the evacuation shuttles to get clear." The ship shuddered again as the Vraxi intensified their assault, emerald beams gouging into the Hyperion's armored hull. Console panels sparked and smoke began to fill the bridge. Ilara activated the shipwide comm. "All hands, this is the captain. Proceed to evacuation stations immediately. I repeat, all hands abandon ship." She paused, taking a deep breath. "It has been an honor serving with you all." As the bridge crew began filing to the escape pods, Ilara stayed at her post, hands flying over the controls as she attempted desperate evasive maneuvers. The Hyperion was a lost cause, but every second she could buy would mean more of her people making it to safety. The Vraxi ships moved in like carrion birds, their weapons carving away the Hyperion's armor, slicing through decks and bulkheads. Ilara watched the damage reports flow in, the ship schematic on her screen blossoming with red as compartment after compartment was open to the cold vacuum of space. "Captain, you need to get to a shuttle," Kai urged, pausing at the bridge entrance. "There's nothing more we can do here." Ilara shook her head grimly. "A captain goes down with her ship, Lieutenant. Get yourself to safety. That's an order." Kai hesitated for a long moment, then snapped a salute. "Yes, Mom. Godspeed." He turned and ran for the escape pods. Alone on the bridge, Ilara continued her futile dance, the mortally wounded Hyperion groaning around her as it was slowly torn apart by the implacable Vraxi onslaught. She thought of the thousands of colonists asleep in their cryo chambers, dreaming of a new life on a distant world, a life they would never see. A strange calm descended over Ilara as she watched the lead Vraxi cruiser drift into position for a final devastating salvo. They had fought well and hard, but in the end, it hadn't been enough. As the alien ship's energy lance charged up for one last blast, Ilara closed her eyes. The Vraxi beam lanced out and impacted on a shimmering blue barrier that had suddenly appeared between the cruiser and the Hyperion. Ilara's eyes snapped open in disbelief as new sensor contacts lit up her display. A fleet of human warships had dropped out of warp, guns blazing as they charged the surprised Vraxi line. Over the comm, a confident voice crackled. "Hyperion, this is Admiral Milland of the UNS Vanguard. Apologies for the delay. We'll take it from here." On the view screen, the human ships tore into the Vraxi with a storm of missiles and railgun fire. Ilara slumped back in her chair, exhaustion and relief washing over her in equal measure. They had been on the brink, staring into the jaws of defeat. But now, impossibly, they had a fighting chance. She allowed herself a weary smile. The battle was far from over. But as long as even one human ship was still in the fight, there was hope. There was always hope. Innovation. In the bowels of the Hyperion, a desperate struggle for survival was unfolding. The Vraxi boarding parties had breached the hull, spilling into the ship's corridors like a metallic tide. Outmatched and outnumbered, the remaining crew fought a losing battle to repel the invaders. Amidst the chaos, a figure darted through the ship's maintenance tunnels, a satchel of tools clanking at her side. Mira Kovelik, the Hyperion's chief mechanic, had a plan. It was a crazy plan, a desperate plan, but it was the only one she had. Mira had been in the engine room when the Vraxi had first attacked, working to coax more power from the ship's overtaxed reactor. When the order to abandon ship had come, she had hesitated. The Hyperion was more than just a ship to her. It was her home, her responsibility. She couldn't just leave it to be torn apart by the Vraxi. And so, while the rest of the crew had fled to the escape pods, Mira had set to work. The Hyperion's weapons were failing, its shields collapsing. But Mira knew the ship better than anyone. She knew its strengths, its weaknesses, and its potential. In a cramped maintenance closet, Mira appended her satchel, spilling tools and components across the floor. With practiced hands, she began to assemble a device, her brow furrowed in concentration. The ship rocked as the battle raged outside, the distant thunder of explosions echoing through the hull. Mira worked feverishly, splicing wires, welding metal, repurposing the tools of her trade into something new, something deadly. A crash from outside the door made her look up. The Vraxi were close, their heavy footfalls and harsh alien language growing louder by the moment. Mira redoubled her efforts, her fingers flying over the makeshift device. Just as the door began to buckle under the assault of the Vraxi boarders, Mira finished her work. The device hummed to life, a jury-rigged EMP grenade cobbled together from spare parts and determination. Mira armed the grenade, and with a silent prayer, tossed it through the collapsing door. There was a blinding flash and a crackling burst of electromagnetic energy. The Vraxi soldiers, their systems overloaded by the pulse, collapsed in a clatter of lifeless metal. Mira peered out at the silent corridor, a grim smile on her face. One problem down, a ship full of problems to go. Over the next hours, Mira became a ghost in the Hyperion's corridors, striking from the shadows, using her intimate knowledge of the ship's systems to sow chaos and destruction among the Vraxi ranks. She rigged the ship's cleaning bots to spew corrosive chemicals, turned the gravity plating into a deadly patchwork of crushing force and weightlessness, and transformed the ship's industrial fabricators into makeshift bomb factories. The Vraxi, used to the straightforward brutality of ship-to-ship combat, were unprepared for this kind of unconventional, guerrilla warfare. They found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn, their technological superiority countered by human cunning and desperation. In the command center of the lead Vraxi cruiser, the alien commander watched in mounting frustration as the assault on the Hyperion faltered. The reports from his boarding parties were confusing, contradictory. The humans were fighting back, but not in any way the Vraxi had ever seen before. On his view screen, a feed from a soldier's helmet cam showed a human female, her face smudged with grease and determination, lobbing some kind of improvised explosive into a squad of Vraxi troopers. The commander leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. One human, causing so much chaos, it was unthinkable. But as the battle wore on, and the Vraxi casualties mounted, the commander was forced to confront a chilling realization. The humans, with their backs against the wall, had found a way to turn even the humble tools of maintenance and repair into weapons of war. They had taken their greatest weakness and made it their strength. The tide was turning. Against all odds, the humans were fighting back. And the Vraxi, for perhaps the first time in their long history of conquest, felt a stirring of something unfamiliar, something that felt disturbingly like fear. Desperation. Mira Kovalik wiped the sweat and grime from her brow, leaving a streak of grease in its wake. Around her, the once pristine corridors of the Hyperion were scorched and scarred, littered with the twisted remains of Vraxi war drones. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burnt metal and ozone. She had lost count of the hours since the battle had begun, lost track of the number of jury-rigged weapons she had assembled, the number of desperate plans she had set in motion. She was exhausted, battered, running on little more than adrenaline and stubborn determination. But she couldn't stop. Not now. Not with the fate of the Hyperion. And everyone on board, hanging in the balance. Mira ducked into a side passage, listening intently for the telltale clanking of Vraxi patrols. In the distance, she could hear the muffled booms of the ongoing space battle, the Hyperion shuddering under the impact of enemy fire. She checked her satchel, taking inventory of her remaining supplies. A few lengths of wiring, a handful of power cells, a couple of welding torches. Not much to work with. But Mira had always been resourceful. She would make it enough. A sudden crash from up ahead set her heart racing. Peering around the corner, she saw a squad of Vraxi troopers advancing down the corridor, their metal feet stamping in perfect unison. But there was something else, a larger shape looming behind them, a hulking silhouette that filled the passageway. Mira's blood ran cold. It was a Vraxi heavy assault unit, a walking tank bristling with weapons and armor. She had heard stories of these monstrosities, capable of shrugging off entire magazines of rifle fire, of tearing through hull plating like paper. And now one was here, on her ship. For a moment, despair threatened to overwhelm her. What could she do against such a thing? She was just one mechanic, armed with little more than spare parts and desperation. But as she watched the assault unit lumber forward, an idea began to take shape in her mind. A crazy idea, a desperate idea. The kind of idea that just might work. Quickly, Mira set to work, her hands flying over the components in her satchel. She had no time for finesse, no time for second guesses. This would either work, or it wouldn't. Minutes later, as the Vraxi squad drew near her position, Mira stepped out into the corridor. In her hands, she held a makeshift device, a tangle of wires and power cells strapped to a pulsing, glowing core. The Vraxi soldiers raised their weapons, but Mira was already moving. With a wordless cry of defiance, she charged towards the assault unit, the device held out before her like a talisman. The Vraxi opened fire, energy bolts sizzling through the air. But Mira didn't falter. She leaped forward, slamming the device against the assault unit's armored chassis. There was a blinding flash, a deafening roar, and then silence. When the smoke cleared, Mira was lying on the deck, her jumpsuit scorched and tattered. But the assault unit was a crumpled heap of twisted metal, its internal systems fried by the overload of energy from Mira's improvised EMP bomb. The remaining Vraxi soldiers, stunned by the sudden destruction of their heavy support, hesitated. It was all the opening Mira needed. She scrambled to her feet, scooping up a fallen Vraxi rifle, and opened fire. In the command center of the Vraxi cruiser, the alien commander stared in disbelief at the video feed from his falling soldiers. One human, one single, solitary human, had taken down a heavy assault unit. It was impossible. It was unthinkable. But as he watched the human female rally, as he watched her press the attack with a ferocity that belied her battered condition, the commander felt a sinking realization. The humans, they were not like any foe the Vraxi had ever faced before. They were unpredictable, adaptive, indomitable. And they were winning. Turning the tide. On the bridge of the UNS Vanguard, Admiral Niland surveyed the tactical display with a grim expression. The Vraxi fleet was formidable, their ships arrayed in a precise formation that spoke of centuries of martial discipline. But the human fleet was holding its own, fighting with a tenacity and resourcefulness that the Vraxi had clearly not anticipated. Status report. Niland barked, his eyes never leaving the display. Shields holding at 60%. Admiral, his tactical officer responded. We're scoring hits on the enemy vessels, but their armor is tough. It's taking multiple strikes to penetrate. Niland nodded, his mind racing. The Vraxi had superior numbers and technology, but the humans had something else. Something less tangible, but no less powerful. They had the kind of undaunted spirit that could turn even the direst circumstances into an opportunity. An idea began to form in the Admiral's mind. It was a risky gambit, but if it worked, he turned to his communications officer. Get me a channel to the Hyperion. I need to speak with Captain Vance. Moments later, Ilara Vance's face appeared on the view screen, her features etched with exhaustion and determination. Behind her, the Hyperion's bridge was a scene of controlled chaos, crew members rushing to and fro as they fought to keep the battered ship in the fight. Admiral, Ilara greeted, her voice strained but resolute. "What can we do for you?" Nyland leaned forward, his expression intense. "Captain, I have a plan. But I need your help to make it work." As he outlined his scheme, Ilara's eyes widened. It was audacious, unconventional, and it just might turn the tide of the battle. "We're with you, Admiral," she said when he had finished. "The Hyperion will play its part." Nyland smiled tightly. "I knew I could count on you, Captain. Let's show these Vraxi what humans are made of." The plan was set in motion. The human fleet, following Nyland's lead, began to shift formation, drawing the Vraxi ships into a tightening web of crossfire. At the same time, the Hyperion, limping and battered but unbroken, began a seemingly suicidal charge towards the heart of the Vraxi line. On the Vraxi command ship, the alien commander watched the human maneuvers with growing unease. They were up to something, some trick. But what? His answer came in a sudden, blinding flash. The Hyperion, its hull glowing with the heat of a massive energy surge, detonated in the midst of the Vraxi formation. But it was no ordinary explosion. The ship's reactor, overloaded by a carefully timed power surge, had released a massive EMP burst, frying the delicate electronics of the nearby Vraxi ships. In an instant, a third of the Vraxi fleet was crippled, drifting helplessly as their systems struggled to reboot, and the human ships, shielded from the blast by the Hyperion's sacrifice, pounced like wolves on wounded prey. It was a turning point, a moment that would be remembered in human history for generations to come. The Vraxi, their seemingly invincible armada shattered, fell into disarray. And the humans pressed their advantage, firing with renewed vigor and determination. In the heart of the Hyperion's wreckage, a small battered escape pod drifted. Inside, Ilara Vance, Mira Kovalik, and a handful of other survivors huddled, listening to the chatter of the human fleet as it drove the Vraxi into retreat. They had done it. Against all odds, against an enemy that had seemed unbeatable, they had found a way. They had taken the tools of their trade, the skills of their craft, and turned them into weapons more potent than any laser or missile. They had shown the galaxy what humanity was capable of, and they had sent a message that would echo across the stars. Never underestimate the ingenuity of the human spirit. The final stand. The Vraxi commander stood on the bridge of his crippled ship, his clawed hands clenched at his sides, his eyes fixed on the viewscreen that showed the shattered remnants of his once proud fleet. Around him, his crew worked frantically to restore systems, to bring weapons and shields back online. But it was a losing battle. The humans had outsmarted them, outfought them. With a single brilliantly executed maneuver, they had turned certain defeat into a stunning victory. And now, the Vraxi were in full retreat, limping back towards their home space, their dreams of conquest shattered. But the commander was not ready to admit defeat. Not yet. Not while he still had one card left to play. "Bring the proto-weapon online," he growled, his voice thick with a mix of anger and desperation. His second-in-command, a spindly creature with a face like a skeleton, looked up in shock. "But sir, the proto-weapon is untested. We don't know what it will do." The commander silenced him with a glare. "It will destroy the humans. That is all we need to know." In the depths of the Vraxi ship, a sinister device hummed to life, its core pulsing with a sickly, unwholesome light. It was a weapon of last resort, a doomsday device born of the darkest corners of Vraxi science, and it was aimed directly at the heart of the human fleet. On the UNS Vanguard, Admiral Nyland frowned as his sensors detected a massive energy surge from the Vraxi command ship. "What the hell are they doing?" he muttered, a sense of unease growing in his gut. The answer came in a wave of seething, distorted space-time that burst from the Vraxi vessel, a tidal wave of destructive force that warped and twisted everything it touched. Ships caught in its path crumpled like tin cans, their hulls shredding, their crews screaming in agony as they were ripped apart on a molecular level. Nyland watched in horror as a third of his fleet simply ceased to exist, erased from the universe in a heartbeat. All ships, evasive maneuvers. He roared, his voice cracking with desperation. Get out of its path. But it was too late. The proto-weapons wave was expanding, a ravenous maw that devoured everything in its reach, and it was headed straight for the vanguard. Nyland closed his eyes, bracing for oblivion, but it never came. Instead, a new voice crackled over the comm, a voice he had thought he would never hear again. "Admiral, this is Captain Vance. We'll take it from here." Nyland's eyes snapped open. On the view screen, a battered, barely recognizable shape was accelerating towards the Vraxi ship, placing itself directly in the path of the proto-weapon's deadly wave. It was the Hyperion, or what was left of it. "Ilara, what are you doing?" Nyland demanded, his voice raw with emotion. "Your ship can't withstand that kind of—" "We know, Admiral." Ilara cut him off, her voice calm, resolute. "But we can buy you the time you need." In the Hyperion's engine room, Mira Kavalik worked furiously, her hands flying over the controls as she channeled every last erg of power into the ship's shields. She knew it wouldn't be enough, but it might just be enough to make a difference. As the proto-weapons wave hit, the Hyperion shuddered, its already battered hull groaning under the strain. But incredibly, impossibly, it held. For a few precious seconds, the ship absorbed the brunt of the blast, its shields glowing white-hot as they struggled to dissipate the unimaginable energies. And in those seconds, the human fleet struck. Missiles, railguns, energy beams, every weapon at their disposal focused on the Vraxi command ship, tearing through its weakened shields, shredding its hull. The proto-weapon sputtered and died as its power source was annihilated. And with a final, world-shattering explosion, the Vraxi ship disintegrated, taking the last hopes of the alien invasion with it. In the silence that followed, the Hyperion drifted, a burnt-out husk amid a field of debris. But from its ruined hull, a small battered shuttle emerged, limping towards the vanguard. On the bridge of the flagship, Admiral Nyland watched as the shuttle docked, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. The hatch opened, and Ilara Vance stepped out, supported by a grime-covered Mira Kavalik. Nyland stepped forward, his hand outstretched. "Captain, I don't know what to say." Ilara took his hand, her grip firm despite her injuries. "You don't need to say anything, Admiral. We did what we had to do, what anyone would have done." Mira nodded, a tired grin on her face. "Besides, I couldn't let those Vraxi bastards have the last word. Not after all the work I put into keeping the Hyperion flying." Nyland looked at these two women, these heroes who had given everything, who had faced the impossible and emerged victorious. And he knew, with a certainty that resonated in his very bones, that as long as humanity had people like them, there was no challenge they couldn't overcome, no foe they couldn't defeat. The battle was over. The war was won. And the galaxy would never be the same again. A new dawn. The war was over, but the work was just beginning. In the weeks and months that followed the decisive battle against the Vraxi, the shattered remnants of the alien fleet limped back to their home system, their once fearsome ships reduced to little more than space junk. The Galactic Council, once so dismissive of the human upstarts, now spoke of them with a mix of awe and trepidation. For the humans had done more than just win a battle. They had shattered the very foundations of galactic power, upended centuries of unquestioned Vraxi dominance. They had shown that courage, ingenuity, and sheer stubborn determination could triumph over even the most advanced technology and the most formidable foes. And in doing so, they had sparked a new era of hope and possibility. On Earth and its far-flung colonies, celebrations erupted as news of the victory spread. Parades filled the streets, fireworks lit the skies, and the names of the heroes of the Hyperion, Ilara Vance, Mira Kavalik, and so many others, were on everyone's lips. But for those heroes, the true reward was not in the accolades or the adulation. It was in the quiet moments, the moments of reflection and remembrance for those who had given their lives so that others might live. In a small private ceremony, Admiral Niland presented Ilara and Mira with the highest honors the United Nations Space Command could bestow. But as he pinned the medals on their chests, his words were not of glory or triumph, but of gratitude and humility. "You showed us the true meaning of courage," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You reminded us that the human spirit is the most powerful force in the universe, and for that, we will be forever in your debt." Ilara and Mira accepted the honors with quiet grace, but their thoughts were already turning to the future. For they knew that the battle against the Vraxi was just one challenge among many that humanity would face as it ventured deeper into the stars. "We can't stop here," Ilara said later, as she and Mira shared a quiet moment in the Vanguard's observation deck. "We have to keep pushing forward, keep exploring, keep learning." Mira nodded, her eyes fixed on the endless expanse of space beyond the viewport. "And we have to remember what we're capable of, what we can achieve when we work together, when we refuse to give up." In the years that followed, humanity did just that. New ships were built, new colonies founded, new alliances forged with the myriad species of the galaxy. And always at the forefront of these endeavors were the veterans of the Hyperion, the men and women who had stared into the face of annihilation and refused to blink. They became the stuff of legend, the heroes of a new age. But to those who knew them, who had fought beside them, they were something more. They were a reminder of the unbreakable spirit that dwelled within every human heart, the spirit that had carried them through the darkest of times and into the light of a new dawn. And as humanity ventured ever deeper into the cosmos, as it faced new challenges and new foes, that spirit burned brighter than ever. For the galaxy had learned a lesson that would never be forgotten. Never, ever underestimate the power of human determination.